Little girl cried out for her mother, but her mother just ignored her. A bottle of pills rolled from her hand to the floor as she shook it. The pills were scattered all over the floor. It turned out that her mother had taken sleeping pills and killed herself. But 3-year-old Pihu doesn't know what death is yet. Yesterday, his mother threw a birthday party for 3-year-old Pihu. When she woke up in the morning, the house was a mess. Pihu calls out to his mother for a drink of water, but his mother seems to be asleep. Dad wasn't home either. Pihu ran out of patience, jumping to the ground with his bare feet, playing alone in the house, too short to reach the door handle, so she gave up on going out. She took the newspaper and turned to go upstairs. When she heard the sound of rushing water, the kitchen tap was left on. Pihu moved a stool to turn off the tap, but even when he stepped on the stool, he couldn't reach it. She had no choice but to give up. She went upstairs and told her mother she wanted to go on the swing, but her mother still ignored her. Pihu turns on the TV and turns up the volume. She danced with joy. She called out to her mother to come and dance with her, but she was still lying in bed. Pihu was confused. Why is her mother ignoring her today? At this moment, Pihu feels lonely and helpless. Instinctively, she crawled on top of her mother and cried. She tried to shake her mother. She still did not respond. At that moment the phone rang. The phone was on the counter and Pihu couldn't reach it, so she went downstairs to get a stool. The phone stopped ringing before she could get it upstairs. Pihu came back to her mother. She told her mother that she wanted to go to the toilet. She still didn't move. Pihu had to go to the toilet by herself. He tried to sit on the toilet. At that moment the phone rings again. Pihu went downstairs and continued to carry the stool, but when he got upstairs, the phone stopped ringing again. After playing for a while, Pihu wanted his mother to help him get dressed. His mother still didn't care about him. Not knowing why, Pihu cried on top of his mother. He shook his mother harder and harder. The bottle of medicine rolled out of his mother's hand. The pills rolled to the floor and scattered all over the floor. It turned out that his mother had taken sleeping pills and killed herself. But 3-year-old Pihu didn't know what death was yet. She played curiously with the white pills. She put the pills in a bottle. She looked up and asked her mother if I could take them. She was so hungry. But then the phone rings again. It distracted her. To get to the phone she climbed up on the counter. With great difficulty she reached the phone, but on the way down, she dropped the phone to the bottom of the bookcase, but accidentally picked up the call. The angry voice of her father came on the line. He came up and cursed his wife for not packing her bags. He didn't iron his clothes, and he angrily told his wife to go to hell. Pihu tried hard to reach out, but his arms were too short to reach. Dad was still complaining. He had to catch a plane on a business trip. He called back this time. It's because he left in such a hurry and forgot to turn off the iron. Dad thought his wife was still angry and ignoring her. Hearing his daughter's voice, he hung up after a few words of comfort. Dad didn't know yet. Because of the argument last night, my mother really committed suicide. She even left her last words on the mirror with lipstick. I married you despite my family's opposition, but you spent all your time drinking and fooling around and staying out all night. You said you'd only come home when I was dead. This shows that the couple was not getting along. Her husband's domestic violence and cheating led her to the end of the road, but she didn't have the courage to take her daughter with her. Pihu starts digging through the cupboards looking for a new target. Her attention was drawn to the smoking iron. The ironing board had burned holes in her clothes. Pihu was intrigued by the smoke. She went over and lifted the clothes off the table. The potential for fire was temporarily solved, but she was still curious about the iron. This toy looked different. She reached out to touch it, and the next thing she knew, she was crying out. She was so upset that she had burned her skin and beard. She cried herself to sleep as she lay on top of her mother for comfort. When she woke up again it was noon. Pihu was so hungry. She stretched out and told her mother she wanted some milk. She sat on her mother and rubbed her face, hoping that she would wake up soon. She doesn't respond, so she looks for her own. Finds a bottle but accidentally drinks it on the floor. She finds a towel and dries the milk herself. She went to the kitchen and found 2 pancakes. Putting one in the microwave just like an adult. She presses a few times and waits patiently until she turns it on again and it's already baked. Pihu tries again, lighting the gas stove, throwing a pie directly onto the fire. Soon the pie was burnt and even flamed. Looking at the blackened pie once again, angry, Pihu walked away without turning off the heat. Then she moved on to the fridge. There were many bottles and jars on the fridge. With much effort Pihu finally opened the fridge. She found a piece of leftover cake. Pihu sat on the floor and grabbed it with her hands. After filling his stomach, Pihu plays hide and seek. He makes a place in the fridge and gets in. It's not easy to be surrounded by darkness and cold. Pihu starts to struggle. She doesn't want to play this game anymore. It took a lot of effort to swing the fridge door open. Bottles and jars spilled all over the floor. Pihu concentrates on her jam and toast. She doesn't give a damn about the outside world. The doorbell rings and the cleaner comes to collect the rubbish. Pihu can't reach the door handle and looks through the crack. When he sees that someone has left, he goes back to his mother and starts playing. The phone rings again and Pihu pulls out the ruler and picks up the phone. Dad asks Pihu to give the phone to Mom. Pihu carefully puts the phone on his mother's ear. Dad is already on the plane and the phone will be off for 2 hours. This time he called to make sure the iron was unplugged. Pihu only said that Mom was still sleeping. The flight attendant hung up on him before he could finish his sentence. Pihu couldn't wait to pick up the toy phone and imitate it, but the other end of the phone cord was tangled in the iron stand. As she did so, the iron fell down with her. The heating plate is pressed against the ironing board and smoke rises from the high heat. There is always a risk of fire, and the kitchen hose keeps running. The lights for the birthday party are next to the sink. Pihu is engrossed in watching the TV. When the power goes off, the screen goes black. Pihu imitates an adult and goes around the back to check the wiring. The TV is still not responding. The doorbell rings again and the milkman arrives. Pihu couldn't open the door and had to look through the crack. The milkman couldn't find anyone and tried to leave it at the neighbor's house. To his surprise, the neighbor's aunt refused to help and complained. She said that Pihu had come home late last night to have a party and that it was too late to rest. Tired of watching, Pihu slowly fell asleep on the floor. When he woke up, he was ready to go upstairs with his doll in his arms. There was no change in the house and the water kept running. Suddenly a small explosion was caused by touching the electric wire. Pihu was scared and cried and ran upstairs to her mother for comfort. The iron is still smoldering with the sound of sparks. Mom still hasn't woken up and Pihu is attracted by the sound outside the window. She had forgotten her mother's advice. Pihu runs out onto the balcony, calling out to the little ones downstairs, showing off his doll. When they didn't respond, she poured water downstairs hoping to get attention, only to be scolded by the people downstairs for her lack of morals. Inadvertently, the doll fell onto the drying rack. Pihu tries to pull the doll back with her hands, but it's not quite there yet. She had to sit down and hook her foot around it, but instead she let it fall. Pihu climbed up the railing and shouted the name of the child even louder, hoping that her friend would help her retrieve it. If she had leaned forward just half a cent, she would have fallen. Fortunately, the neighboring aunt next door saw her and shouted to stop her. She said she would bring the doll to her. She escaped with her life intact. Back in the house, my father called. He had arrived at his home. When he calmed down, he tried to apologize to his wife. Pihu told her that Mom was still asleep. Dad hadn't noticed the difference yet. He hung up the phone again in a hurry to get to work. Pihu was bored and tossed around on the floor. Tired, he fell asleep on top of his mother. Once again she woke up hungry and went downstairs to look for food. There was a bottle of milky white insecticide on the balcony. Pihu mistook it for milk. She wanted to use it for dinner. Luckily, when Pihu was pouring the milk, he was clumsy and knocked the bottle over. All the insecticide fell on the floor. Pihu then gave up. The water from the kitchen was gradually spilling into the living room. The neighbors called the property owner to solve the problem, but they couldn't knock on the door, so they had to stop for now. She was alone, cowering under the dining table. She ate the leftover food from last night. Dad called again. Pihu continued to tell her mother and father that she was still asleep. This time Dad finally realized something was wrong. He rushes to the airport, leaving his work behind. She won't hang up for fear of her daughter's accident. She kept telling stories to get Pihu's attention, but inside she was in agony. But Pihu's mobile phone had run out of battery. Without her father's voice, she went back to eating. He even fed his mother. Pihu's mother, who was kissing down, saw a fly. Pihu helps his mother to chase it away. The pills on the plate caught Pihu's attention again. Pihu asks his mother again if he can take them, but still no response is taken as a tacit approval. 1, 2, 3 pills and Pihu takes many. Despite the bitter taste, she did not stop moving. Then Pihu played with her mother's nail polish. Maybe she was tired of playing, or maybe it was the pills. And with it came sleepiness. Pihu lay on the floor and slowly closed her eyes. It was as if she heard a bell, but she didn't have the strength to answer it. A happy picture of father and daughter on the bedside table. The only people in the room were her mother, who was stiff, and Pihu, who is not sure if she is alive or dead. The room is lit up with colored lights as night falls. The walls are blackened and the smoke from the iron spreads everywhere. The sound of water spreading outside the house. The noise of the neighbors is heard. They negotiate with the security guards to break down the door. Shortly afterwards, Pihu's father finally arrives. The door opened to a cloud of smoke. He called out his wife and daughter's names in a trembling voice. He rushed upstairs and saw only his wife, who had been dead in bed for a long time. He didn't see his daughter. He went to the bedside and said sorry to his wife. But where was his daughter? He called out for his daughter. Finally, Pihu's voice came from under the bed. She told her father to wake up her mother. She had built a beautiful home. Dad let out a heartbreaking scream in the dark, sobbing uncontrollably. This film is based on true events. In reality, the father killed the mother and then committed suicide. The child is rescued after spending a day with the bodies of the parents. Some parents are the protectors of their children. Others are the child's undoing.